I am Karen Lackey, and I am from ESC of the Western Reserve, and we are from the Prevention Services Department. You might recognize Holly Jacobson and Jenny Canganelli from TPP, or from Youth-Led Prevention, or a couple of the other social, emotional, and support programs that we do at Chardon. But we're here today because Joan gave us a call because she was interested in some of the services and strategies of the School Community Forum. So we're here today, I can explain a little bit later, but we are a coalition of 46 agencies who a couple of years ago got together for the specific purpose of providing schools better support and more evidence-based programming when it comes to social emotional services. So we started all of that last year, even before COVID hit. So a lot of our resources and a lot of the access you have to our resources, you know, is going to be a natural flow. So that's the one good thing. We're going to put up our slide presentation now, and we are going to get started. We will be on screen as well, but again, you still have access to the chat box. So one of my favorite things about this presentation as it loads, we're obviously here to talk about building resilience, which is a lot of what we do. But my favorite part is the subtitle, how to make this suck less. I'm telling you, just because we know, we've seen what you've been through, we have seen what the administrators have been through, and you have a staggering amount of changes that you're putting in place right now. So our job is to try to provide you resources as best we can. I had to take a look now that we're in this environment. I thought, oh my gosh, the last pandemic, when, you know, it was 1918. I said, I wonder what public education looked like then, because that was our last time we were in this situation. And really, we had just been getting started in public education, but elementary schools were strong. But think about this number. I looked at the number of high school seniors in 1918. It was only 290,000 nationwide. We have 5.1 million today. So imagine what this country is going through, something totally unprecedented, trying to adapt education for millions of kids, not just a few 100,000. So, you know, props to you. You have enough on your plate, enough changes. So what you're going to see today and what we're going to give you when we leave you, hopefully we'll be able to help make this suck less and support your kids more. Okay, next slide, please, Hal. So why we are here. We are here obviously to give you as many resources as we can to build resilience in our students and also build resilience in yourself. We are going to give you a quick trauma review on the background because we want everything we do and you do to be done in the context of a trauma-informed environment. Every time we train, we like to give you tools, skills, strategies, so you'll get some checklists, you'll get some easy-to-use resources, and you'll get a couple frameworks that are going to continue to work not only now in a COVID environment, but once you get post-COVID and you start to want to build things like we were talking about in the beginning, if you were on developmental relationships, keeping those connections going. Because we have found the information you're going to get today, much research has shown that it not only affects behavior in a positive way, building resilience and developmental assets, but it also increases academic outcomes. So not only do we want to do that now, obviously, because the kids are coming back after a long time off, but we're also going to continue to do that in the future. All right, so on to the quick trauma review. For some of you, you might have had this with Natalie or with Morgan and Family Pride, but what, in a nutshell, trauma is simply any emotional response to a terrible event. Obviously, COVID falls under that. This is a more long-term, drawn-out terrible event, but it's a terrible event. It is because of three basic things that you guys all will recognize. One, there's a break in the connections we have. Now for us and for kids, you know, as family, teammates, friends, but it's also a break in the normal activities that we usually have. You know, so not just the things that are fun and that we love to do, sports, hanging out with friends for kids, same with you, but also the traditions. And you're going to see why the traditions and the purposeful activities have meaning in a little bit, but traditions like going to grandma's house every Thursday. For kids, that's a big thing. It gives them structure and it gives them meaning. You know, getting their little brother off the school bus every day. That's a purpose for a young person. And then finally, purposeful activities as well. You know, our students have been cut off from everything from their music lessons. That's a sense of purpose, something they feel capable doing, to faith activities. So what we've done is we've had cut off ourselves, and our students have been cut off by these very three prominent things. And the biggest part of it is we don't know when it's going to end, which is the lack of predictability. So for all of us, you know, as adults, maybe we've been through something like this before. Maybe we've had a hospital stay. Maybe it's just our experience, but we have the skills to get our heads around lack of predictability. A lot of times kids do not. They do not have a life experience, and they don't have those skills. So that's what we're going to try to give them by the end of today, or give you to give them by the end of today. So these are some of the stress symptoms that we're going to talk about. These are typical and they're global. I mean, it's loss of time and sequence, spacing out, being more forgetful. You should recognize a lot of them. Loss of safety and loss of control. And again, a little bit we talked about a minute ago, which is loss of purpose. These are global. They are, you will see them in ourselves. We see them in kids. But now what Jenny is going to do is run through and see what they might have looked like in our lives every day.
Hello, everyone. We are just going to take a little break in the action here and hopefully make you smile. So Holly can put up our first fun slide. Not sure if any of you were feeling like this when you were going out to the grocery store to maybe buy those toilet paper, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, whatever you needed. I think a lot of us had mixed feelings when we left the house, especially when this first started. And then, I don't know if any of you ever felt like this one, especially by about April. I don't know if anyone was texting or emailing their supervisor saying, oh, my video doesn't work, because you just couldn't get ready for a Zoom call or a Google Meet or a Microsoft Teams meeting. And then there is one of my favorites. Not sure what your house looked like, but in my house, all of a sudden, I had everybody home with not 1 inch of space for myself, and everyone is still home. And so feeling a little frustrated or irritated with all the people living in your house, in your space. And I think this last one is definitely going to resonate with everybody. Just completely losing track of what day it is, what time it is. I see Joan laughing. I don't know if any of you ever missed a Zoom meeting because one, you just totally forgot it was on that day, or maybe you just didn't even know where the link was. But I think we can all relate to that sense of these days and weeks just lasting forever and ever and ever. And as funny as these are, and as much as we can all relate to these, I'm sure some of you more than others, these really describe the typical symptoms that Karen just touched on that are traumatic stress symptoms. Here's the difference. You know, we as adults probably all found ways to cope, whether it was, you know, laughing, talking to friends, family, you know, maybe we learned new hobbies. But our young people, our students, they don't always have those skills or the life experience or the perspective to adapt like we did. So it's going to be really important that we offer them and we give them those tools to help them with some of these stress symptoms. And that is where, you know, we are really trying hard to develop ways to support your students. And help them make some sense of these traumatic stress symptoms. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, so my kids were already a handful. Now they're all just going to be like super out of control and bad, and it's going to be worse than ever. Relax, that's not the case. Because here's the thing, research has shown that when young people are exposed to a traumatic event, they react, they respond, typically one of 3 ways. So let's say there's 3 siblings and they're in a bad car accident when they're younger. One of the siblings may have severe long-term traumatic effects, okay? Maybe they can't get in a car. Maybe when when they're 16, they finally are trying to learn how to drive and they shake and they just can't do it. Maybe they have nightmares about the accident. Those are those long-term effects. One of the other siblings, typically a third of young people, are going to have some short-term trauma effects from that accident. You know, usually within 30, 60 days, they're better, they're doing better. But in the beginning, you know, maybe they can't get into a car for the first couple of weeks. Maybe they just need to really talk about it after it first happens. After about 30 to 60 days, they're doing much better. And then here's the thing, a third of young people, a third of people that experience a traumatic event, they don't have any effects at all. They're completely resilient. You know, that sibling might get out of the car and be like, whoa, that was a bad accident, and never talk about it after, okay? So it's important to remember that a third of your students, they already have some of that resiliency, and they are not as affected or completely unaffected by a trauma such as COVID. So what this might look like in your students, and Holly's going to put up a list, when your students come back, they might seem like they tire more easily. I'm sure some of you can relate to this as well. And that's not just physically tired of putting in a full day when you're not used to it. That's mentally and emotionally tired. They might get easily frustrated. Again, some of you might have seen this in yourselves. A lot of times we are going to assume, you know, maybe that's a young person acting out, but we really need to keep in our mind that this is what trauma could look like in them. Difficulty problem solving and planning, that is a big one. They might seem a little more oversensitive. They might get their feelings hurt a little more easily, maybe a little more defensive. Maybe it might look like they're becoming more aggressive. Might have difficulty listening and staying focused. They might seem a little more impulsive. The important thing is you know, they don't have those skills like we do as adults. They may seem even more self-centered because they have lost that control. They've lost a sense of purpose. So trauma may look like all different things in your students, and these are just a few of the things just to keep in mind as you're bringing them back to the class or you're having them online, that this might be how it looks. Now, Karen's going to talk to you a little bit about what happens in our brains when we experience a traumatic event.
Okay, so now we are going to get to what happens in the brain. And we are going to do that in the context also of not only what happens, why it's extremely important for you to understand, and then what we want you to do about it, what kind of tools we can give you. Okay, so this is a typical brain in a trauma response. There's a traumatic, on the left side, there's a traumatic or chronic stress event, obviously in this case, COVID. What happens to the brain when there is any traumatic event is our brain responds the same, no matter what that event is. The brain responds with increased adrenaline. It responds with increased cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It becomes hypersensitive because our body is, quote unquote, under attack, whether it's under attack from something that's imminent or under attack because of all those lack of connections, lack of predictability. Our body and our brain react the same. It feels that we're under attack. So that's the stress response that happens in the brain. What we call this is on the right side, because what happens is one of three things. When our body is under stress and it feels attacked, what our brain does is puts us into one of three modes of operating, either fight, flight, or freeze. Now, if you look at that list that Jen just got done discussing, all of those symptoms fit in one of these three categories. So fight, more aggressiveness, a little more easily agitated. Flight, zoning out, can't remember, sleeping a lot, always tired. Or freeze, just not doing anything. Okay, so you can do any of these across multiple circumstances. Flight can be the kids who just don't even tune into school anymore. If they're online, kids don't even come to school anymore. That's flight. So it could be fight, flight, or freeze. Any of those behaviors you saw on Jen's list fit into one of these categories. So what we call that, which is at the bottom, is survival skills. In this event, the behaviors you see, we would like you to lean toward considering that these are survival skills, because a lot of times what happens is our survival skills appear only as bad behavior, especially in students. Oh, they're not listening. Oh my gosh, they can't pay attention. Please err on the side of them being a survival skill, not just a bad kid or a bad behavior, because there is a different way to handle it. And before we tell you how, the importance of knowing what this system is when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, the brain does something critical to education, is the prefrontal cortex is limited. So anytime that you want them to plan, anytime you want them to do a complex math problem, anytime you want them to problem solve, if they are in that traumatic response mode, fight, flight, or freeze, the brain literally does not function in the prefrontal cortex as well as it would normally. And the second thing that happens, which is important to all of you, is our memory stores. Two things are limited: our access to our long-term memory and our ability to code things into memory. So both those things happen in fight, flight, or freeze. So what do we want you to do about it? We would like you to respond with what we're going to teach you from now on is resilience skills. So what we are going to do is we're going to put up how to break this cycle, and that is simply with resilience. What we are going to do next is we are going to give you kind of a framework on building response. And what this is this is called, it's easy to remember because this is something we want you guys to do by remembering what we call the 4 C's. There's the 4 things you can do in a classroom with an individual student and just in general that helps build resilience. So those 2/3 of kids Jenny was talking about. The first one is rebuilding connections. Again, you'll see these relate a lot to our symptom, but rebuilding connections. Any way you can connect with a student, anytime you can reestablish any connection of them with other students, with important adults in their lives, and with their purpose, reconnection, number 1. Second is competency skills. And what competency skills are, the heart of the matter that we're going to give you a lot of information on in a little bit. And what competency skills are when we have the ability to increase our skills in problem solving, we increase our ability to self-calm, we increase our ability to take a breath and settle our minds. So in a trauma instance, we're able to go engaging to our prefrontal cortex and to our memory stores. So one of the most important things in competency is what we call co-regulation. So I'm going to give you an example. So competency just came up. Those are some of the examples we discussed, but co-regulation to me is an important one. So here's an example I'm going to give you. So say, for example, it's in the middle of COVID and you haven't seen friends, family for a while, and you get a phone call, and whatever that call was just made you angry, just ticked you off. Like you hang up the phone and you're like, think about it. What is the first thing we as adults do? Okay, what do? Take a breath, right? We breathe. We find ways to calm ourselves in whatever way we do. Then what's the second thing we do? We reframe it. Now, wait a minute. Okay, is this just me? Am I reacting to this? Like, am I off? I don't know. So we reframe it. Let me see if I can think about it from their perspective. We empathize. It's the second thing adults do automatically. And then what's the third thing we do? Is our spouse comes walking down the stairs like, all right, hang on, I gotta run this past you. Let me know what you would do in this situation. Am I crazy here? So we run it past somebody, so we co-regulate. So that is the most important thing, I think, in one of the competency skills we don't, and because we often don't have time to do as students, is we do automatically things that they don't know how to do. They don't know how to take that breath. They don't know how to reframe a negative feeling. And they certainly don't know how to co-regulate, because what do we normally do with a student that's out of control? Go down to the office, go out in the hallway, go sit over there until you can get control of yourself and then come back. That doesn't teach them any skills. So this is a really, really big one we like to concentrate on, is those competency skills. Because teachers are the most important people that model that skill and teach that skill. And we know it takes time. But in this environment, like I said, if we really want to engage those kids' brains fully and get them out of the trauma response, this is one of the most important skills we want you to know. Okay, next is contribution. Anytime we want to increase resilience in kids, any way we can give them a way to contribute. It could be assigning little responsibilities in a classroom. You know, who's in charge of checking desks, who's in charge of helping, you know, disinfect, or whatever you can name. So again, it also comes along with contribution is giving them a sense of value and worth. So even letting them know that their presence in the classroom, this is their purpose. Glad to see you back. That gives them a little sense of purpose, which is contribution. Then the last one we're going to throw up is going to be control. This one you can do in a lot of ways, but simple in the classroom, like my favorite example is to give them control, is to give them predictability. So having the same schedule, which a lot of you probably do over and over again, make sure when they come in, they know what's going to happen first, second, third. Gives them a sense of control. One of the simplest things is, do you have a working clock? It's a big thing. If for those kids who are trauma response, knowing what time it is really important to them. Not only knowing their schedule, but knowing the time. And then last, bigger concepts. This is one of the big things. We just had a training on youth-led prevention, which is one of the programs we run. You know, control and contribution are two of the biggest things that we can do to help kids, because when you give kids a voice, if you even ask them what they think, if you even ask their opinion on how they might restructure something in the classroom, or if their needs are getting met, that is a huge sense of control that really gives them a voice. And that amount of voice really helps build resilience. So now what Holly is going to do is get you to the nuts and the bolts of what we're going to talk about. Is now you've got the 4 C's, you've got the framework. Now what we want you to do with it, and how we're going to give you some tips and tools for how to respond.
And thank you, Karen. So here is the deal. So now that you guys, I mean, it sounds like you guys have had a lot of training today with all of these things. So what do we do with this? The first thing that is the most important, which I'm sure you guys have been hearing about, is that COVID obviously is the environment that we are currently living in. And it has the ability to change our disposition. It can really create how we react to another person. I know Jenny had talked about it a little bit earlier, but you know, there's many times where now we overreact about something, or we have an extreme reaction to something. So we may see this in students as they're overreacting. It might be internal, so we may not be able to like see it outwardly, or it may be externally where we can see it. And it might be the things that we might think aren't really a big deal in a typical environment or just normally, but to them, for whatever reason, it is a big deal, and this is how they're handling that. So we have a couple different things that we should consider. The first one is to consider before we even react to how that student is, whether they're acting out or they're just not doing anything and there's no reaction. The first thing to do is to consider, are they in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? Are they kind of stuck in this like survival skills, like I don't know where to go? And with that is, you know, consider the feelings. What are the feelings? What are your feelings, and what are their feelings? Before you even respond, just stop and try to think like what that is. Because I know a lot of times we just, especially in this environment, we just have an automatic reaction, but it's best to just kind of stop, consider fight, flight, or freeze. And then, you know, what are the emotions or the feelings? So with this, we're going to give you guys some tips and tools. So once you've stopped, you've considered fight, flight, or freeze, you've stopped, you're looking at the reactions, or I'm sorry, their feelings. Now we start to figure out how are we going to respond to this. So one of the, I think, most tactful and easiest ways to respond to a student is saying, I noticed that you seem frustrated. I noticed that you seem really upset. I noticed that you seem disappointed. Whatever their feeling is that you notice, it's a much simpler way to acknowledge, right? Responding with the affirmation, acknowledging that you're getting that there is a feeling that they're having, without saying, why are you reacting this way? Or what are you doing? Because that times, a lot of the times, puts them on defense. And I'm sure you guys know that then they start fighting back. So a really simple thing is, hey, I noticed that. I noticed that you have this feeling. And then respond like, yeah, this is super frustrating for everybody. I get it. This is really tough environment, that whole affirmation piece. And sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm stressed and I got a million things going on and I know I have a timeline and I have to stop and think, how can I show affirmation? Because sometimes I just want to get going and I don't have time for this. So we really have to stop and be like, okay, I know this is really tough situation. And by the way that I notice, I've changed my reaction sometimes will really change the way a student would react back. And then with that is offering a grounding activity, whether it's, hey, we're going to stop, take a few seconds, we're going to do some breathing, we're going to really like, right? We're going to talk about some of those ideas here in a little bit so that you guys have those hands-on tools that you can use with you. One other thing is catch them doing something right before they even get to anything. Even a student that is usually a really good student you never have any issues with, just, hey, you know what? Great job with that today or whatnot. Everybody loves some positive encouragement at some point. And then assign a task. And it doesn't matter if you are elementary, middle school, or high school, assigning a task really goes back to those 4 C's. It allows them to feel like they have a sense of control. It allows them to feel like they're contributing to something. So even if you have a high school student, I mean, obviously you're not gonna have them be a line leader, but you could have them be, you know, hey, can you tell me when halfway through the classes today so we can stop and do a 2-minute grounding activity? Hey, you know, would you mind turning off the lights? Even though it sounds super simple, giving them this simple task is really going to give them more of a sense of purpose. It's going to allow them to have more of that power. So why is any of this important is really a big question. So this is really important because a lot of times we don't necessarily realize this is happening. We don't realize that our students are under this sort of trauma or that we're even maybe experiencing it. And so I'm just gonna give you guys a really quick story. So I've talked to several teachers and I've been to a couple schools, and at one school, I was there and I asked the teachers, how are your students doing? Like, I know this is a really tough environment. Our students are perfect. They're wonderful. They're great. They have no problems. Well, that's amazing. That's really great that they have no problems. All your entire district. That's awesome. So that's wonderful. So I went and I was in a class and I was demonstrating something. And so I asked the students, how are you guys doing? They had a totally different reaction than the teachers. They were like, this is so tough. I can't do this. This is hard. So we really just had an honest conversation about what this environment is, how are we feeling, and without telling them, hey, these are trauma symptoms, it's, hey, you know what, there's a such thing as a COVID brain. You can't remember the math you learned last year. That's normal. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't know what you're doing. It's your brain literally is going through all of this stuff and it's having a hard time figuring it out. And so as more we explain this to the students, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I thought I was the only one that didn't know what was going on, or I thought I was the only one that was experiencing this. So creating that shared experience of this happening, and the fact that a lot of times we don't see it, but internally they're experiencing it. And that's really important to be able to identify the difference in that. Even if we feel like they're totally fine, there's a lot, 2/3 of them are struggling inside if they're not doing it outwardly. So it's really, really important. And with that, we had at the same school, I had one of the teachers come up to me after one of these talks, and they said, I'm having this issue with the student. I have no idea what to do with them. They're one of those kids, right? They're one of those kids. He acts out, he's lazy, he lays on the floor, he, throws things around the lunchroom. He just is out of control. So very simply ask some questions, and we gave these simple tips. And instead of challenging the student, ask them, hey, I noticed that you're feeling frustrated and you threw your milk across the lunchroom. What's going on? And even though our natural reaction is to just, this student has actually, in 2 weeks, has completely turned around because the teacher has started to react differently to him. They started to, affirm that these things are going on. We stopped and we started doing grounding activities. So, and the teacher, it's very sweet. She'll email me and say, okay, we did really good today and we did this. And so these things are really important. And the realization is it's not taking away from class time. It's not creating more things to do. It's just a different way to approach a behavior that you have to address anyway. So it really actually in the long run saves time. It saves headaches. It makes things less stressful and makes your class run smoother. So these are some tools. We also have a few more just really quick things for you guys. One of them is developing that relationship. So I just gave you the story about the teacher. Obviously, this teacher didn't really have a relationship with student. One, they were a new student to them. I mean, they're a 7th grade teacher. They never had them in 6th grade. So this is a new student to them. There was no relationship, but So it's really important that we start to develop these relationships. They're intentional relationships with our students. That way they are able to feel like they're connecting. Again, those 4 C's: feel like they're connecting, feel like they're contributing, feel like somebody cares about them. Really, really important things. So I know that somebody asked if we were going to be sending out the notes. We will be sending out the PowerPoint, and along with that, you guys will get some other resources. And one of those is actually building developmental relationships from a distance. And this is a checklist that was developed by the Search Institute, which I'll go into here in a second. And it's really just a simple checklist that we can just look over and say, oh, I can do that, that, and that. Really super simple things, but just starting to develop those relationships is going to change student behavior. It's going to decrease their risks, the risky behavior. It's going to help increase their test scores. It's going to help increase their learning, and it's going to help increase them thriving as human beings. So with it, that's part of the developmental assets. The developmental assets is more of the bigger model. Developmental relationships is part of that. So with developmental assets, there are 40 assets that have been identified that young people, the more that they possess, the less of these risky behaviors they partake in. And so that's why it's really important. So one of these assets is like increasing positive sense of self, feeling like their school cares about them, a sense of purpose, and there's 37 others. So those are just some of those things that are assets that really help our young people. So all of the tools build on not only the trauma-informed, but the 4 C's and the developmental assets. All right. And so the next tool that we have for you guys, which I think is a really, really important one, and it's a hands-on tool, but Jenny's going to go ahead and take over and let you know all about the Connections Classroom.
So for those of you in particular that are working with the middle school students in the Choices and Challenges classes, this was something that we wanted to make sure we share with you along with all the other teachers. It can be shared with anyone. It is a Google Classroom. Holly's going to go ahead and take us into the Google Classroom, which again, talk about learning a new skill from someone who's not a teacher. I learned more than I ever wanted to know or thought I would need to know about Google Classroom. We designed this with hold on. We designed Connections Classroom to be a resource, a very simple, easy to use resource for teachers to apply some of these skills and tools that are going to help build resiliency in your students. Activities, brain breaks that can be done in a very short amount of time. Holly, do you need me to share? Okay. They can be done in a short amount of time. Because here's what we're finding. Like we talked about all those trauma symptoms, the being tired easily, the oversensitive. We recognize that you as teachers and school staff are probably experiencing some of those same issues, same trauma responses. So this was really designed for you to also take part in some of this with your students, to give you that 5 minutes, 10 minutes of a break. You know, we call them brain breaks. Well, obviously in high school, you may not call them a brain break. So you do what, you know, you call them whatever you want that's age appropriate. But it's broken down into why. Why is this important? And then under building resiliency skills in students, there's a section there, the how do I build? And it's really about what does a resilient young person look like? What are some of the characteristics that they have? And what can I do to help build those resiliency skills in my classroom? Okay. Then if there's a lot of information in there. We have added tips and tools. You know, one of the tips and tools we learned from another trainer was the HALT. And that's in there too, I think, Holly. You know, just taking a second and stopping and asking myself, am I feeling hungry? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling lonely? Am I feeling tired? And asking your students to ask themselves that. And if the answer is yes to any one of those 4 things, now you know it might be time for a break. I'm not sure exactly how long your classes are, if the classes were extended. I know in some schools they've done some pretty interesting scheduling changes. So you may be having students in your class for an hour, whereas normally maybe it was 30 to 40 minutes. You know, you may need a break in there. Your students are going to need a break in there. You know, we're working with schools that the students are stuck in the same classroom all day long. They get off the bus, they come into school, they're in that classroom. The teachers move, but the students do not. They stay in that classroom all day long. I cannot imagine as a young people being stuck in one room all day long for school. So they are going to need those breaks just like the teachers are. So we've designed these brain breaks, and there are multiple in here. Basically, even something as simple as chair yoga. If someone were to say to me, Jenny, I want you to go in and I want you to do chair yoga, I would not know the first thing about teaching young people chair yoga. Marlo is going to do a video about chair yoga. You are going to click on that video. It's going to pop up on your screen at school. You can share this in Google Classroom. You can share it with your kids that are doing virtual. And they can take 5 minutes to ground themselves, regroup, to relax, doing chair yoga. Simple. There is a whole list. One of the real popular ones is the anything to do with music. Any of you that work with young people, most of them love their music. So we've got different type of music for every taste that can help with relaxation. We have the piano activity where students can literally use their keys on their keyboard to play a song. All kinds of things, individual things, puzzles, coloring pages, any type of activity that's going to be mindful, relaxing, help them get grounded and be more productive in your classroom, and also give you a few minutes of a break. Another section on the Connections Classroom is our question of the day. Like Holly was saying, building those connections is one of the most important things you can ever do. For those of you that have had us in your classrooms doing either youth-led or TPP, you know that we are constantly interacting with the students. We want them to feel more comfortable. We want to start building those connections. But sometimes that's hard to do. We don't know what to say. We don't know if we have, maybe especially at West G, you have new students from Newberry that came over. How do I get these young people to start talking to each other, start talking to the teachers, feeling more comfortable? So really just asking a question of the day. We start out small, something just for fun. What's your favorite food? We have a list of several questions. Again, you can copy these, you can send them out in email, you can put them in your Google Classroom, you can write them on the board, you can put them on the smart board, whatever you find is easiest for your classroom. And then after you get through some of those fun ones, maybe you do one a week. Okay, then you start building on, well, let me get to know you a little bit better. What are some of your strengths, some of your talents? Again, being resilient means I can identify some of my strengths and talents. I can see what I'm good at and be proud of that. And then creating a shared experience, questions that are going to develop those relationships between you and your students about a shared experience. What was it like during COVID? A lot of young people, no one asked them. They have lost control of everything. They missed out on many things the end of last school year. So they, like you, have experienced all of these trauma symptoms. Only I think as adults, we tend to talk about it a lot more. And sometimes I think we forget to ask young people, well, what's this been like for you? Have you been on the TV more? Have you been, did you learn any new skill? Did you, what were you doing when you couldn't leave the house? So all those things that are going to help. And we encourage you teachers and staff to share your experiences too, when appropriate, because they want to know you're real people. And that, wow, Mrs. Smith also had a really hard time, so she started learning how to knit and that helped her, or she became, she taught herself how to do yoga. Anything that's going to create that shared experience and start building those connections with your young people. And then we've got a couple other sections that we are going to be continually working on. Again, we want to make sure that we're designing these activities and skill building tools to be beneficial so that they're helpful. So anything that you can contribute to help us do that, whether you're a teacher, school counselor, whatever your role is, it would be helpful. Most all of you, I'm sure, are fabulous at developing relationships with your students. Positive relationships are and have always been the greatest contributor to student achievement. If students feel more comfortable in school, in the school classroom, with the school climate, their achievement will be better. Survival skills, important to remember, you might see these as external, or they might be internal. I would suggest erring on the side of they may have a response to this event and they may not be showing you outwards, but remember 2/3 of the kiddos that we're seeing are experiencing something because they are not naturally resilient. It's important that you all teach and model these competencies, these skills. So if you're doing a brain break activity, do it with them. You know, it's important for them to see that you are doing this, you are participating, you are connecting and building those relationships and teaching them those skills that they need. We are here to support you, whatever you need.